Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to finish out your CodeMash adventure of 2018 with zapping security vulnerabilities in the development pipeline. I'm really excited about the Z-Attack proxy. I like it. It's a fun tool. But before we jump in, who here has used the Z-Attack proxy or Zap before? Anyone? Okay. The Z-Attack proxy. Zapping security vulnerabilities in your development pipeline is really just a fancy way of saying we're going to talk about the OWASP Z-Attack proxy, or ZAP, and how it really can be used in every cycle or every section of the development cycle, everywhere from actually mid-development all the way through and including to as part of your continuous integration like Jenkins, using acceptance tests to run as security regression tests even. And we'll be covering really all of those sections today. I think before the mic interrupted me, I was saying we've got a twofold goal for today, really. One, that everyone would leave with the ability to run a ZAP test, to scan an application, but then also, oftentimes we come to conferences like CodeMash and we learn about these great new tools and we get really excited, want to go back to our clients, back to our employers and actually use them. And then we run into the roadblock of business won't approve it. So the second goal is to tell you how to get business to approve you using that. So that's the twofold plan for today. But before that, you're probably wondering who I am. I haven't been able to meet all of you yet. So real briefly, my name is Matt Smith. I'm a full stack Java developer. And so no, I'm not a penetration tester, which I think is kind of good because oftentimes as developers, we're the ones writing the code, but we're oftentimes not the ones necessarily doing the penetration tests. And so what happens is we write our code, then we ship it off to a pen test group, and then they test it and they ship it back to us just moments before it's about to go out to production, days or weeks, and then we have to rush and hastily fix all these things that are wrong. But if we use something like the Z-Attack proxy or the Burp Suite or some tool where we can actually test in the middle of our development, we can find some of these vulnerabilities much earlier, and then we can have nearly the full sprint to fix them as opposed to just a couple days. And even worse, having business say, it's okay, we'll just push that to prod, and then we can fix it next sprint. So I think it's great to see a developer's perspective on how to implement security in development. But like I said, full stack Java developer. Also do some Groovy, a bunch of JavaScript with Manifest Solutions in Columbus, Ohio. But I'm a hobbyist breaker of things. I always have been. I just like it. It's just the idea. Have you ever been a kid playing in the sandbox or going on vacation to the beach? You build a sandcastle, and then what's the next thing you do? You knock it down. And it's the same thing in adulthood. You grow up, and just like when you're a kid on the beach, you build a sandcastle, and if you don't knock it down, what happens? Some other kid comes along and knocks it down for you. And that's the reality of our applications. Adults are just balding children. That's all we are. So if we don't try to knock down our own applications, someone will for us. And so if someone's going to get the satisfaction of breaking things, I want it to be me. But here's where kind of the business side comes in. Why do we use that? I know if you're here, you're probably interested and aware of the security needs, or at least you have some desire to be. But the reality is business may not be. So if business comes back and kind of pushes back saying, well, why should we? Why should we invest your time and resources into using the Z-Attack proxy, Zap, or Burp Suite or something? Here's what you tell them. One, it brings security earlier into the development lifecycle, which, like we said, it shortens that feedback loop of you don't have to wait the full sprint and then have the pen test done, and then moments before deploying to prod, you hear about these vulnerabilities. You can hear about them right away. And if a feature breaks, if someone commits some code that breaks an old feature, if you have regression security tests set up, you can find that out right away. So it's going to prevent a lot of problems from entering, which is going to save money. It also broadens the security understanding. If only the pen testers know what to look for, then it's a lot easier for people to introduce vulnerabilities that they may not have known were possible. Also, it frees pen testers to focus on some of the harder to find vulnerabilities, because a pen tester, when they test your application, they're going to want to find something. No pen tester wants to come back to you and say, we didn't find anything. Why? Because nobody writes perfect code, right? Nobody writes perfect code. So a pen tester knows that, and if they come to you and say, we didn't find anything, they know that your thought's not going to be, great, our application's perfect. You're going to think, you're not very good at your job. So if we fix the easy to find things, they're going to have to find the hard to find things to show us. So it makes them work for their money, and it makes us look good that, man, our application is kind of decent, right? So in short, just tell business it saves the money. It's great. It'll work. But now to Zap, the fun part. What is it? It's a penetration testing tool. It is an OWASP flagship product, which, if you're not familiar with OWASP, it just means it's mature, it's frequently updated, highly maintained, highly used. Being part of OWASP, it is free and open source, which reads business likes it, and Matt likes it because it's open source. I like to know what my tools are doing, and you can dig into the code. And if you don't like how it's doing something, you can change it. It's wonderful. It's all out on GitHub. It's also cross-platform, so whether you're running Windows, Mac, Linux, you can start it up and run it. There's even a Docker image. If you're of the Docker persuasion, you can set that up and run it, and within seconds, you can be testing your application. But I think what's probably even more important than who sets Zap up is what does it do, right? I don't care who brings me the treat. I care how good the treat is. So Zap has so many features, more than we could really cover in an hour, more than we could cover in a day. So I'm sorry if you're familiar with Zap and you have a favorite feature that's not on this list. This is what we're going to be talking about today. And I know this is primarily the active scan heavy, because I think that's kind of the bread and butter of Zap. So the features we're going to be talking about is a spider. Is anyone familiar with the concept? Kind of? Okay, I see some nods and some not some nods. So a spider scan is essentially you tell Zap where to start. You give it a URL, and Zap will take that URL, go out, get the response, search through, scan through that HTML, looking for any other links, anchors, sources on images, anything that it can then use as another URL to go reach out and find the result, the response HTML of that, and it just recursively, it just repeats itself until it has nothing else to find. One nice thing with Zap is you can turn that on or off. You can also configure it to only recurse to a certain depth. So we'll talk a bit more about that when we get into the live demo, which I'm sure won't go wrong at all. One of the other things is after it builds up the site tree through the scan, you can, through the spider, you can actually scan either passively or actively. The difference is a passive scan is safe. So it's legal to do on sites that you don't own, because being a proxy, Zap works by intercepting the requests that you create and you send to the server. It intercepts those, and through a passive scan, it just records them and then sends them right along. It doesn't alter them at all. It just records what you sent, sends it along as is, and then records the response. So that it's passive because it's not doing anything other than logging what you have. So it's safe. However, that can find some vulnerabilities, but not all of them. Can't find cross-site scripting because you have to try to inject a script. So some of these big ones that you want to look for, it won't find. That's why it also offers an active scan, which is nice. However, my due diligence, I have to tell you, do not actively scan an application that you don't own. You can get in serious trouble. Like, you can end up in federal prison. That's not a joke. Look up stories about it. People have opinions about their code. I don't know if you know that. And people don't like you messing with their application. So that's my disclaimer. Do not actively scan. Do not actively attack an application that you don't have literally written permission to do. That's it. But if you do, scan the crap out of that. It's so much fun. As part of these active scans, you can actually tell Zap what you want to scan for, which is really useful. Sometimes you don't want to scan for everything. You don't want to scan for these lightweight, low-risk vulnerabilities. You just want to get the hard-hitting stuff. You can do that. Also, it's most common, the real hard-hitting vulnerabilities are going to exist for logged-in users. So people with privileges. Zap can scan as that, and you can actually choose what privileges to give that, what user to log in as, and we'll go through that as well. It also can generate reports, which is really wonderful. Everyone loves reports. It's another thing if you're trying to convince people, business, to let you use Zap, show them a report. Also, possibly my favorite part is that Zap can run, there's a GUI, so you can just run it manually as you're developing. You can also automate it. There's the REST API, which we'll go through today as well, it's wonderful. It also integrates with your continuous integration, like I said. So if you have, how many folks have acceptance tests for your application? Okay. How great would it be if you could turn those already written acceptance tests into also security tests? With Zap, you can do that. And that's the wonderful thing. So we'll go through that today. But now that we all really love Zap, I kind of have to be a little Debbie Downer and bring us back to reality. Zap doesn't do everything. I mean, I've heard people say you come to conferences and people present as if this tool is the next greatest thing, it's going to fix all your problems. Nothing will. So Zap, just be aware, Zap does not replace a penetration test. It's a tool to better prepare you for that. It is used by professional pen testers. So it is a tool that is, I think, pretty renowned and respected in the pen testing community. But don't tell business this is your pen test, because it's not. Why? Because it doesn't do everything that a pen test does. It doesn't scan the source code like we do and hopefully you do in peer reviews. It also just can't test for everything. It's not going to test your infrastructure. It can't test really business logic. There's certain things that a proxy just can't figure out. As much as people love machine learning, it's not going to do everything. But now to the fun part. I want to show you just what Zap can do. I love show and tell growing up, but I always loved the show part more than the tell part. So that's what the rest of our time today is going to be. Let me mirror these displays. We'll get going. All right. Tell me if folks can see this, if it's too big, too small. It works. It's always weird. There's a little bit of resizing you need to do when you go from a monitor or laptop to monitors. But okay, everyone can see this? Good, cool. So a few things. This is just the Wordy Ninja blog, which is something my boss, Chris Judd, created as an intentionally vulnerable web application used to demo and learn tools like Zap. So it is designed to just mirror a basic blog. You've got a blog post with a random image that's generated, sign up, log in, and then over here I've got Zap running. And like I mentioned earlier, Zap works as a proxy. So when you start up Zap, Zap starts to listen on a host and a port, and you can change that if you go to settings and local proxies. I have it set to localhost 8081, but you can really set that to anything you want. And then all you have to do is open up your browser of choice and configure it to proxy through that same host and port. So I have Firefox running. proxied through localhost 8081. And you'll notice, as I refresh this page, you may have already seen over here in Zap, it's already picking up what requests it's received. And on the left here, you've probably noticed the site tree being built up. So Zap does a few things. Like I said, it always listens, it always scans passively, and it remembers each request to build up this site tree. And you had asked about, does the passive scan tell you the vulnerabilities it finds, and it does. You'll see here, even just on the home page, it tells us we've got a medium alert. If you double click on the request that you want to look at, it'll give you more information about it. Up here, the request, down here will be the response. If it has one to show. It's got a number of different pieces of information that you may want. But if you really want to look at the vulnerabilities that it thinks it's found, go to the Alerts tab at the bottom, and it'll show you all of them. And I think it's a really, really useful tool. It'll tell you where you found the vulnerability, or where it found the vulnerability, what URL. If there are multiple URLs that it found the same vulnerability at, it'll list all of them. It lists how risky it thinks this vulnerability is. In this case, multiple X-frame options header entries, Zap considers medium risk. Another thing to note is the confidence, because Zap's not perfect. And also some things are hard to determine whether it's an actual vulnerability, whether the app actually has this vulnerability. It's difficult to determine that just through a passive scan, and sometimes even through an active scan. So Zap will tell you how confident it is, how sure it is that your application actually has that, because sometimes it can be a false positive. It'll tell you have a security vulnerability when you may not. But it tells you all kinds of different information. If it's a vulnerability you may not be familiar with, it tells you a description about it. Here's what this vulnerability is. It even gives you a reference. You can go out and learn more about it. And one of the beautiful things is it gives you a possible fix. Here's a solution. Ensure that you only have a single X-frame options header as present at the response. Right? It's great. But you probably don't want to have to manually click through each URL, each link to build up the site tree. So you're probably going to want to use the spider and let it scan for you. I have a weird request. Does someone have a cell phone on them? If you pull up a timer, a stopwatch rather, I want someone to time something for me. I want to show you just how easy it is to scan a vulnerability. So I'll tell you to start, and then I'll tell you time. Tell me what the time is. Okay, so start. Time. What did I get? 6 seconds. That's all it takes to start a scan, to start a test on your application. How great is that? You're a pen tester now. You're scanning your application. All it took was 6 seconds. But you'll see here's at the bottom, you'll see it's racing through all kinds of stuff, because this is what I just did was the quick start scan. It's just a generic scan. It does two things. It starts off with a spider, where it, like I said, I told it start at localhost 8090, which is where I have the Wordy Ninja blog running. And it starts there, parses through the response, clicks on every link it can find, every endpoint, every image tag, whatever, and it recursively finds those, builds up the site tree, and now it's running this active scan, where it's looking through that, trying to exploit the different vulnerabilities that it is looking for, that it knows to search for. And then, once it's done, it builds up this beautiful list of all of our alerts. You see, we've got some dicey ones. Cross-site scripting, reflected, a SQL injection. So we want to know where it is. You just click on it, and again, high risk, but it's not so sure that you have it. But it tells you where it is, so that you can go find it on your own to see, is this actually a vulnerability? I think that's key, that you shouldn't just blindly test a tool, because it can be wrong. But any questions so far? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it'll go through the files itself. It goes through. You can see here in this section that's moving. It just goes through the response HTML, and it'll search through those. I assume you're talking about the spider scan. Yeah, yeah. So that's one of the limitations. Yes, and you can. And I'm glad you asked that. So that's one of the things, right? We have this application and we want to scan it, but as you can tell, this took a bit of time to scan even just this small, simple application. That took, I didn't time that, we probably should have, but 30 seconds, a minute or so. If you have a production-sized, fully fledged, mature application with hundreds of endpoints, you're spidering through all of those and testing for everything on each endpoint. It could take a long time to run through. So one of the things you're probably going to want to do is either exclude certain endpoints, or just include and say, okay, I just want to test these specific endpoints. So to do that, yeah, Zap allows you to narrow down your search in a couple ways, right? One, we've got this site tree over on the left here. Let's say we've got, let's go for this. We've got a results, a search term. This looks like, it's got a search term, you're passing something in. This looks like it could have something bad. Is that a question? Oh, okay, sorry. You're good. Looks like this could have a vulnerability. Let's say if you know a specific endpoint, you just built some new beautiful search feature and you're like, okay, I should probably test this, make sure I didn't do something I shouldn't have, or not do something I should have. You can just click a specific endpoint and click attack and active scan it, and it's going to take you to this active scan, and it just gives you a starting point that you can see here. I'm going to do one thing real fast. I'll get to policies in a minute, but I forgot to delete that when I was rehearsing. So if you right-click, attack, click active scan, if you choose not to recurse through, you can scan, and you'll see it was a whole lot faster. It scanned just for that, just for search term. So yeah, you can narrow down to just search for certain things. But to your question, let's say you've got more than one endpoint, right? You want to build up, here's this page or this feature set, and you want to test that. The way Zap determines what is in scope, the scope for Zap is what it says it's allowed to actively attack, what it's allowed to actively scan. And this is how you don't accidentally scan or attack some site you don't have permission to. Zap has scope, like I said, and the scope is just a collection of contexts. So if you were wanting to attack a certain page, you would build up a context. So let's say we do that. We want to attack our login page, right? You just include in context, just set a new context, and it'll take you to this page. Is that large enough? You folks see that? No? Move up, Dad. I work with him, so I can tell him to do that. But for real though, can people see that? Kind of? No? What's the keybind to zoom on a Mac? I don't usually zoom in when I'm coding, so I don't know. Command plus does nothing. Look at that. Wonderful. Teamwork. This is why we come to conferences. So, all right, so when you start a context, right, and remember a scope is just a collection of contexts, and the scope is what you scan in your attack. So you start a context, it'll take you to the screen, and it has a few options. It uses regular expressions, both to determine here's the regular expression, any URL, any endpoint that matches this, go ahead and scan. It also, to your question, if you want to exclude certain ones, same thing. You can add those to the context. So let's say, let me zoom out for a second. Let's say we build up that context. We want to test the login page, but we don't want to test this results. So exclude from context. Oh, it won't let us click on that one. That's probably because it could be an either or thing. I typically go for the whitelist idea of just include what you want to include. I found that approach to be a little more understandable, and it gets what I expect. But I think you may be right that it is just an either or. That's quite possible as well, that it doesn't match what you're already including, so by default. Yeah, but so you can build this up, same thing. Let's say you want to include this login get, but you also want a login error. Include that in context. Oh. You're right. Yeah, so let's say we want to exclude that. So you can, if it's a subset of your include. We're learning thing, guys. This is great. So let's say you want to test just this part of this page. You can build up your context, your include, and your exclude. Click OK. And then when you're on active scan, you can click your new scan. And instead of giving it a starting point, you can select from your context. You select your context, and you'll see it opens up which context. And then if you scan that, it'll just scan what you've told it to. So, and even in addition to that, Zap has not just context, but it also has sessions. And session is really just a collection of all the information. So you can set up your context, and one of the things that I found is useful is, especially if you have exploratory QA, you can have your QA folks have Zap proxying as they're exploring around the application. And what that'll do is build up this site tree of saying, hey, I just manually tested feature XYZ. Now, I've got this whole list of endpoints. I have this whole collection of requests that I've sent. You can persist that and then save that, run that as a test and say, okay, Zap, now you go test this for security vulnerabilities. It's really great. It's killing two birds with one stone. I mean, if you're already doing the thing, why not make it do something else as well? So, any questions about context? Cool. So one of the things you'll notice, again, this is still going, so it can be pretty long. One of the things to help kind of hasten your test is not just narrow down what locations you test, but what you're testing for. Let's say you don't care about some of these real minor things. It's like, okay, we're just now starting to think about security. We really want to test for the major things, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, that kind of stuff. Zap allows you to do that through policies. And you go to Analyze Scan Policy Manager. I think it's really useful. Let's say, like I said, you just want to test for high risk vulnerabilities. One thing that I found confusing at first with Zap, Zap allows you to set two things. For every vulnerability that it tests for, you can set two values. The default alert threshold. Sorry, I forgot to zoom back in. You've got the default alert threshold, which at first was a little counterintuitive for me. The lower you set this, the more issues that will be flagged, which I guess makes sense because it's a threshold, so once you meet the threshold. But so if you only want the high-risk vulnerabilities, set it to high. If you want low, set it to low. The reason it confused me is because the other setting that you can set is the attack strength, and this is how hard is Zap going to try to find this vulnerability. So let's say we really want to find just high things. I'm not going to do insane because it's called insane for a reason. I think in the documentation it even recommends not doing insane because the way it increases its attack strength is by trying more requests. So if you set it to insane, it's going to try an insanely large number of requests, which means you could just be testing for two things, but if you're going to test, 12 endpoints for these two things at an insane volume, it could still take a long time. So let's just leave it at we want high-risk things, but we kind of really want to know. Just to show you that you can actually go through and set these for specific vulnerabilities. So if you really want to fine-tooth comb it, you can. For our purposes today, I think it's fine. We'll just say scan for everything, but only show me the ones that are high risk. But really try to figure that out for me. So let's give it a policy name. Call it CodeMesh 2018. And now, if we scan a new we do a new scan. Let's scan everything this time. So scan it all. But we're just going to do our scan. One thing I almost forgot to do, Zap does not clear out your alerts in between your scans. So if you don't manually clear them out, you run another scan, you won't be able to tell which alerts were new. So I'm going to clear that out and then run our new scan, right? So we want it the base localhost 8090. We're going to scan for everything, or we're going to scan just for high-risk things, but we're really going to scan for it. We don't need a context. We're just going to use our default context. Let's go. And you can, what's that? Yeah. Well, yes and no. It does not drop tables. So, but I think that's a great question. Part of why you don't want to scan, actively attack, actively scan applications that you don't have written consent to is because it finds the vulnerabilities by exploiting them. Although it kind of benignly exploits them. So it will send a request that will get it an error that will tell it a SQL message. So for SQL injection, it won't drop tables, although sometimes it can insert a whole bunch of rows. I'll show you that actually if you want to see. So you'll notice we have a sign up page, a sign up post. It tested the sign up post. We had 5 users before we ran that scan. We now have, I don't know if you can see that, 1,500 users. So yes and no. It was a valid thing. It's not an exploit. It went through the valid request just 1,512 times. Yes. Yes. And that's one of the things I would highly recommend not running this against production. Probably shouldn't need to say that, but I'm just going to so that you can't email me frustratedly later, Matt, you ruined my database. I did not. It's your fault. But yeah, you'll see as this finishes. All right, so it just finished. We look at our alerts. We only got the high risk ones now. So it does what we tell it to, and it does it pretty well. But if you tell it to do bad things, it'll do bad things. But one of the last things to kind of round out the bread and butter of Zap is we not only want to be able to tell what to scan and what to scan for, but like I mentioned, we want to be able to scan as certain privileges, right? We want to be able to scan as an admin versus a basic user versus someone who's unauthenticated. So let me log in once. And I'll put the links for this Wordy Ninja blog and Zap up at the end that you can get. So if you want the password, or the user is admin1234. So I'm going to log in. Notice we have our post. To tell Zap how to log in as a user, we have to tell it three things, right? We have to tell it how to log in, how to tell whether it's already logged in or logged out, and then who to log in as. So similarly to creating a context, you find you find the request that will log you in. So here we have login, username, password, and you just say flag as context. Let's go to default context. And it already recognizes you're flagging it as a login authentication. So if you have form-based login, Zap works pretty seamlessly with that. So let me zoom in. You just need to tell it a few things. It's got a username, so you tell it this is the ID on the element, the username element. So if yours is not username, if it's something else, you'll just change it to that. It's pretty good about picking that up. And password. So now it knows how to log in. You'll notice down here it has a regular expression pattern to know whether it's logged in or whether it's logged out. Zap's really easy to get that working. Let's say you've got your history. We just logged in, so you can scroll through the response. Oh, here's the login. All you have to do is highlight and say, okay, if you see a login link on the page, you know you're logged out. So flag as context, default authentication logged out indicator. It adds the regular expression for you. It's really that simple. If you really like regular expressions and you want to write your own, you can do that. It doesn't care. I'm not going to do that because what they said. All right, so here we found a logged out indicator, and I did that by just, again, you just refresh the page, or just figure out a page as I'm logged in, find the request that's logged in, it's right here. Flag as context. Now you've got the logged in indicator. Builds the regular expression for you. But so now Zap knows how to log in, how to tell when it's logged in or logged out, and all we have to do really now is give it a user. It's already found this Zap user because Zap's a little narcissistic, and most of the data that it enters in is just Zap. So if you're interested, I can show you the database. All those like 1,500 users are just Zap, 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 Zap. Zap is, yeah. But Zap is not an admin though, because there's no way through the UI to change itself to an admin. I want to test as an admin. So I'm going to change this to admin1234. We're going to say it's an enabled user. modified. And now we can tell it, now we have admin here, forced user. We can say, all right, Zap, use this user, go. One of the things that's really nice, even if we log out here, if you're working through the UI, you can use this forced user mode. Forced user mode, it's just a lock with user icon. If you click on that, you don't have to worry about Zap getting logged out, because that's one of the concerns, right? You tell it to log in, but then what if it accidentally hits some log out thing that just doesn't match that regular expression? Oh. I'm going to delete this context. One of the issues with having multiple contexts is sometimes Zap doesn't recognize all of them. What am I missing? So what I'm expecting to happen is this will change to log out, because Zap, if I didn't miss a step, Zap will take that authentication that you gave to it. It'll take the user, and it will force log in as that user. So anytime it recognizes that it's logged out, it will log in, and it should log in once. I may have entered the password incorrectly. Yep, I probably entered the password incorrectly. Because what happens is it'll recognize it's logged out, and then it will log itself right back in, even for you in the browser, in the UI, so not just on its test. So if you want to manually click around and make sure you're not accidentally logging yourself out. I don't know why it doesn't allow you to show the password. Like, it's a security tool, and it saves the password in the request you sent, but it doesn't let you. So we're just going to assume that maybe I can't type today. So for the sake of time, we'll move on. But what happens is Zap recognizes the user that you told it, and it will log in as that user and never log you out. We'll try one more thing. But you'll notice, here's some of the cross-site scripting, right? The admin has a page where it can access the users. And it tests. And since we ran a bunch of different scans, here they are. These are 1,500 Zaps. So you get an idea of now you should be able to go in, and you can run a basic scan. If you just want to blanket scan everything, you can do that. If you want to scan as a specific area, you can set up a context or multiple contexts. I would recommend setting up one context, and if you want to scan multiple things, create a different session for each profile that you want to scan, because Zap sometimes does have a difficult time distinguishing between contexts and will only use one. So that would be my recommendation. Build different sessions, and then you can persist those sessions and just open them right back up and add to them. You know, if someone changes the feature, adds onto it, you can do that. But do you have a question? That is a very great question. And yes, Zap is pretty good about staying within its scope, and I'm not sure exactly how it's implemented. I haven't looked at that in the code, but you can do a few things if you're really concerned about that. You'll see over here we have code.jquery, but if we look through the history of the scans, it never scanned code.jquery or Lorem Pixel or Detect Portal. It does recognize when it's going outside to a different place. If, however, you're concerned about that, you can exclude from the proxy, scanner, or the spider. So that is one of those things where you do kind of want to blacklist and say, just don't use this. So that's kind of the basic thing of the UI. I do want to touch on automation and the CI portion, but any burning questions before we jump into that? Cool. So by now, like I was saying, we can scan as a specific user, we can scan specific portions of the application, and we can scan for specific things. But I get bored doing the same thing like 3/4 of the way through. There's no way I want to do it 2 or, God forbid, 3 times. So let's automate it, right? And Zap is just beautiful for that. It offers us a REST API that does not 100% of what you can do through the UI, but most of the things that you're going to want to do, it can do. So let me zoom in here. Yes, I know this is a UI of the API. I understand that. But it's a lot easier to show you this than to just click a button and tell you, trust me, it happened. But that's one of the nice things is, although it's an API, Zap does give you a UI for it that you can go through and check to see, here are the different endpoints. Instead of having to read some boring documentation, you can scan through stuff. So I just want to show briefly, ASCAN stands for Active Scan. This is, like I said, it's bread and butter. So this is where it's going to have a lot of stuff. You can click right through. Let's say we've got our, is there any way when you're zoomed in to like move the screen? Ah, wonderful. All right, so as we're zoomed in here, you can see you can pick the output form, JSON, HTML, XML, etc. So whatever it is that is your preference, you can pick that form method. Let's say we just want to check our scans. Here are the scans we have. I think by default it only keeps the last 4 or 5. You can get information about the scans to show you this is a REST API. It's really easy. You can just curl it. So you can literally just build up your endpoint, or maybe another time if you're clicking through the API, you just copy and paste what you have. And then you can build up a series of curl statements. Or if you want to be officially scripting, there are a number of like pre-built, free open source scripting clients. I think there's a Java one, a Python one, a few others. I'll show some documentation for that, but a number of different ways. You can even run a Zap headlessly, which then it won't see the API, but if you're just running it, writing some scripts, putting a test suite together, run it headlessly, and then you've got your test suite. But scripting, a REST API is kind of cool, but I really want to make machines do it for me. And this is one of my favorite parts. How many folks here use Jenkins? Okay, more than I expected. This is a decent portion. So Jenkins has a not built-in, but Jenkins has a pre-built Zap plugin. So if you use Jenkins, super easy. I will warn you, your Jenkins has to be relatively up to date. So if you're using a super old version, convince your ops team to update it, and then use Jenkins, or then use this plugin. But I want to show that to you. And this is where having your acceptance tests come in real handy, because you already have your acceptance tests set up to run on Jenkins, or set up to run. If you have your application stood up and you have these tests running against it, just the way you would turn them into security tests is you just set up a Zap to proxy on the same port that you're running this this application on, or rather set the test to proxy through Zap's port. And then as the acceptance tests run through, Zap will register these requests that your tests have hit and build up this site tree, build up this suite, and then you can build that into a context and save that as a session. And if you want to save, or you want to run that as a specific user, you just set that up, and then you can set up different jobs in Jenkins, which I will show you now. So here, I've got Jenkins running. I've got 2 builds because I was on 2.6 of Zap, but the latest is now 2.7. Gotta log in again. Before we run it, I just want to show you that, again, this is a plugin for Jenkins, but if you're using something else for CI, because it has the REST API and the scripting clients, you can do a lot of this and just build up your own scripts and run them yourself. So fear not if you're not a Jenkins user. I just have Jenkins because that's the client I use uses Jenkins, and there's already a plugin for it. So just like most Jenkins things, you would set up your job, most CI environments, set up your job, and you add the execute Zap build step with the plugin. Just tell it, here's my Zap workspace. Tell it what host and port to listen on for Zap. Tell it where your Zap is, your Zap home, path to a Zap. Word of caution with this, I don't know why Zap does this, but a number of the Zap files have spaces in their names, and it drives me nuts because in their documentation, they tell you, like, this should work, it's fine. Their documentation shows it working, but it doesn't because of the spaces in the name. So that's why you see this is a symlink to a file path that have spaces in its name. But this path with the spaces in its name is fine. So if you're trying to set it up and it doesn't work, just set up a symlink to the path with a space in its name, and that may work. The other thing, you just tell it to load a session. So this is where you run your acceptance test suite, gather that site tree, those contexts, all those requests, persist it as a session, and then you can just tell your Jenkins job, okay, load this session. And here's the best part, it generates the reports for you. You just tell it, all right, I want Zap demo, build ID, here's my report name. You tell it, again, how to, or where you want to start spidering from. I just have set up as a basic test everything. Tell it, don't go to the logout page because I want you to stay logged in. Again, just like in Zap, you tell it username, password, how the logout regex to know whether you're logged in. Pretty simple stuff. And then the last thing, because we're nearly out of time, you can tell it what reports to build, just like usual. It's got HTML report, I believe an XML report, maybe XHTML, I'm not sure. But we're going to apply these. And then build now. No, because the build isn't considered failed when it finds vulnerabilities. Right? That's part of the point, is we want to find vulnerabilities. So this is just a build to run the test, to look for the vulnerabilities. Failure would be if it couldn't log in or it couldn't find the Zap thing to run on. But it finished, successful. I've ran this a few times, so we'll just look at one of the reports. And this is it. It's not the prettiest thing, but it gives you all the information. You can get it out in XML and put it into any format you'd like. It's really great. So I think we have 2 minutes left. So if anyone has burning questions, I think I'll close it off here and open the floor for you.